By Christmas, I'll be sipping champagne in Tuscany with your money, she said, laughing like it was already booked. She said it in our kitchen, with my grandmother's crystal between her fingers and my face on the screen of her phone as she recorded herself for Instagram. She winked at the camera and mouthed, "Half," like it was a prophecy. If you were watching, you'd probably hate me for staying. You'd probably hate me for letting her finish the glass, for letting her count my empire out loud. But I didn't interrupt because I needed her to keep talking. I needed her to be that kind of arrogant. I needed proof. Have you ever let someone talk themselves into a noose? Tell me I'm not the only one who's done that. We'd been married 3 years. To everyone else, friends, colleagues, strangers, she was the picture of success. Designer bags, a Tesla in the driveway, brunch photos with perfectly filtered cappuccinos. She called herself a business influencer. In private, she called me a walking ATM. "He's too stupid to even see what's coming," she said once, leaning over my shoulder while I typed an email. "Trust me, by the time the prenup runs thin, I'm taking half the business, half of everything." Her words weren't subtle. They were recorded. My Ring doorbell had picked up her rehearsal outside the house one night when she thought no one would hear. My assistant's iPad had a video she thought she'd deleted. But the real dagger was the text thread she'd been sending to someone named G. 17 messages over 2 weeks. 3 months. Get ready to buy our place in Aspen. He'll never suspect. His mom is soft. 3 months later, she filed. She walked into the attorney's office in an Armani suit and left with a smile that could cut glass. She posted it all. Glass ceiling breaking captions. A selfie in front of my office building. The comments were full of congratulations. She booked flights to Europe like a celebration. But I had no idea what I was about to discover. Oh, really? We've all felt that betrayal. Anyone who's been through divorce knows that hollow, punch-to-the-gut feeling when a life you thought was secure suddenly becomes a public negotiation. What would you do if the person you loved was already planning your ruin and actually counted the days out loud? She made the mistake of confiding. That was the first clue. The next came when my mother, who lived in Bellevue, called me the night before the filing and said, "Have you checked the title on the Seattle house lately?" I hadn't. I assumed my name was on everything, like a lot of people do when they don't manage the paperwork. When I logged into the county recorder's site, a cold, clinical line of text stopped me. Owner, Margaret Elaine Hart, my mother. Trust instrument. Hart Family Irrevocable Trust, dated 2014. Worth $12 million. $12 million house. One piece of what people thought was my life. I kept digging. Financial life is an ugly archaeology if you know how to look. There were 3 shell companies registered in Delaware that controlled my healthcare startup. They were listed as Horizon Holdings, Northbridge LLC, and Heartstream. The beneficial owners were my mother. The bank accounts that funded payroll and that I drew a salary from were corporate. The capital, the seed funds, the sales equity, they belonged to trusts and entities where my mom, Margaret, stood as trustee. When I confronted my mom, she smiled like she always did and said, "I had to protect you, sweetheart. Your first wife, your last wife, would have burned everything down. The day you were 26 and slept through the alarms because you were starting that company, I signed papers." "Signed what?" I asked. "An irrevocable trust. Assets put there in 2014 because I knew you'd get distracted by life. I didn't think you'd get married in 2021 to someone who would try to eat you alive. But the paperwork is solid. She can celebrate all she wants. Legally, there's nothing to split. 2 years of lies, 47 deleted messages, $847 million. Yes, that's the number everyone assumed about what he had after the Forbes piece on my startup went viral last year. The truth was more complicated. The company valuation was real, but the way money was held, that was my mother's chessboard. You won't believe what I found next. I called Margaret Chen, the divorce lawyer my CFO had recommended. Margaret had a reputation for being surgical. "This is the most sophisticated asset protection I've seen in 30 years, she said, skimming over trust documents Margaret had emailed. Her accent was mild. Her eyes were not. "Your wife can't take what's not marital property, but she's playing for the tabloids. She wants the headline and the humiliation. That's why we play her game, and then we beat her at it." "Beat her how?" I asked, because the headlines were already writing themselves. "Trophy wife to take Silicon King for half." The social feeds are quick to judge. "By making her look stupid in public, and by giving the judge the full, incontestable record," Margaret said. "Proof matters, and people who shout the loudest usually forget to shred the receipts." We set up a strategy. Step 1, collect receipts. Step 2, catch arrogance on camera. Step 3, prepare a slow, devastating reveal. But planning always hits speed bumps. Setback 1 came fast. 3 days after the filing, my ex-wife's lawyer filed an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order. He wanted immediate access to a corporate credit line to prevent asset flight. For a terrifying hour, it looked like a judge would grant her the power to draw on accounts during discovery. Exactly the kind of panic that turns a well-crafted strategy into a scramble. "What happens if she gets access?" I asked, my voice small, in Margaret Chen's office. "Then everything we've documented will have to be enough to claw it back," she said. "It slows us, and it creates public perception that might sway the judge. We need to show." The transfers were not recent and not her to claim. We won the hearing by proving the transfers were years old and executed by a trustee, not me. But it was a close call, and it woke me up at night. Setback 2 was more personal. I hired a private investigator, a woman named Renee, who used to be a state investigator in King County. She came back with something I hadn't expected. My ex had been meeting with one of my co-founders, a guy named Daniel, at a coffee shop in Capitol Hill. Photos were proof. Renee had caught them on a Ring camera down the block. The messages in my wife's phone hinted at a plan to pressure Daniel into testifying that I had been hiding money. For a moment, I thought my whole strategy would implode because a business partner might lie under oath. "What do you want?" Daniel asked in a voicemail Renee recovered. "The truth, or the headlines?" I called him. "Why are you meeting her?" I demanded. "She's offering me leads," he said. "She thinks I can help her find missing equity." "I'm not stupid. I'm trying to protect my stake." "Don't help her," I said. "She wants chaos." "You're asking me to risk jail," he said. "You think I didn't consider that? Think about me for a second." I had to beg Daniel to stay out of court, to be neutral. He did, but it felt like buying a loyalty that should have been automatic. Setback 3, the cloud backup. She'd been clever enough to scrub her phone. Or at least she thought she had. She deleted messages, erased emails, even switched phones the week before filing. For a while, I thought the one piece of smoking gun evidence, her boasting texts, was gone. But then Renee called, excited. "Cloud backups," she said. She turned off phone backup on the device, but her messages were still routing through her business email for a period. We recovered 47 deleted messages, and they are not great for her. I remember sitting on the floor of my living room reading them, the words blurring into a single accusation. "He's ours in the end. This is how we win. Start stocking the champagne. Tell G we're pulling the trigger next week." Those messages did more than just humiliate. They proved intent. At the same time, Margaret discovered the real twist that would define everything. The trust documents were old, legally airtight. And most importantly, public record. The assets that everyone assumed were part of my marital estate, including a $12 million house in Laurelhurst, a $3.4 million yacht moored in Lake Union, and a controlling stake in a parent company that had taken in $400 million in funding, were in fact protected by the Hart Family Irrevocable Trust. Margaret explained, "Irrevocable means the grantor, your mother, gave up control. You are a beneficiary of the trust. The assets aren't married to you. You can't be forced to divide them in a state divorce." I felt the room tilt. Relief came, but it was mixed with anger. What if I'd known before I'd married? What if we'd done this from the Beginning? The part of me that loved her still hurt. The part of me that had been lied to wanted justice. People think revenge is going into court and winning money, Margaret said. Sometimes it's about making the person who abused the system into the one who looks foolish. The judge hates theatrics. We'll give her theatrics, then strip them naked. We built the case like chess. I let her keep celebrating. I let her think the headlines were hers. I even staged a few missteps, small, controlled, to make her more reckless. I leaked a mistake to a tabloid that suggested I was moving assets. She amplified it. She took to Instagram Live and toasted to freedom and new beginnings in a way that readers love. She posted screenshots of direct messages where she'd privately boasted about counting the days. Little did she know, those posts were the rope we pulled tight. I remember one night she live-streamed from my office, pilfering through a stack of bank statements she thought were hers to read. She said into the camera, "He's hiding something. I can smell it." Her followers flooded the chat with, "Get it?" and "Divorce her ass." I watched with a bowl of cold noodles and a lawyer's note open in my lap. I sat there listening to who planned my destruction in our own kitchen. I told Margaret once. That's when I knew she didn't just want a divorce. She wanted to destroy me. "Good," she said. "Let her want that. It's easier to prove intent." Now, courtroom theatrics. I won't pretend it was easy. The morning of trial, the gallery was packed. Reporters, influencers, my ex's friends with their carefully curated outrage, and my family, stiff and quiet in the back row. My mother sat with a calm that bordered on smug. My ex came in wearing the same Armani suit she'd used for the first filing, hair sprayed into place. She was ready to be seen as the victor. As Margaret stood to speak, my ex's lawyer did his best to paint me as a shadowy billionaire who had hidden assets and would now be forced to split them. "Mr. Hart," he said, smirking at the camera crews, "has built a life on a web of companies and quick transfers. We believe he's been diverting marital assets into entities controlled by third parties to frustrate this court's ability to equitably divide marital property." He looked at me like he had me. The room took a breath. That was his big line. That was the play. Margaret responded slowly. "Your Honor, my client has no issue with transparency. We have submitted the Hart Family Trust documents, dated and recorded in 2014, with a registry acknowledgement filed in King County. The assets in question are not part of the marital estate. The petitioner's public statements and social media posts make clear an intent to extract a public, headline-grabbing result rather than an equitable one. We submit Exhibits A through F. I remember the judge's face as she opened Exhibit A for a second. The courtroom was silent enough that you could hear the air conditioning. Exhibit A shows the trust instrument naming Margaret Elaine Hart as grantor and trustee, Mr. Hart as the primary beneficiary, and specific corporate stock certificates transferred in 2015, the clerk read. My ex's smile dropped in a way that looked almost physical. She started to breathe faster. The first micro cliffhanger I'd planned, when the judge considered preliminary motions, had been survived. The judge leaned back, looking at my ex's lawyer, then at Margaret. "This trust is recorded and signed. On its face, it appears to be an irrevocable conveyance. Are you alleging fraudulent transfer?" Her lawyer opened his mouth, and for a moment I thought he might try to argue fraud. Instead, he said, "We intend to subpoena business records and seek forensic accounting to determine whether Mr. Hart retained beneficial control." Margaret didn't miss a beat. "Your Honor," she said, "we invite the court to look at the full record. Mr. Hart has declared his beneficiary interest. He has cooperated with discovery. The petitioner has, in contrast, displayed a campaign of public self-indictment, text messages in which she speaks of taking half and counting days. We ask the court to see that this is less about equitable distribution than extortion by spectacle." She then slid a printout to the clerk. It was a batch of recovered messages, 47 deleted texts. The courtroom murmured. The judge read one aloud, unable to stop herself. "He's ours. This is how we win." There was a long pause, But then, another twist. The judge asked, "Mr. Hart, is there any evidence he's been using your mother as a straw to hide assets?" "No," I said. "I knew some assets were in trusts for protection. I didn't expect this level of attack." That honesty helped. It humanized me. It also handed the judge a contrast. A man who'd been obscured by bureaucracy and a woman who had shouted in her own favor from the rooftops. Then came the big reveal I'd been waiting for. Margaret stood and walked to a table with a binder so thick it looked like a brick. "Your Honor, we've obtained a recorded deposition taken last week where the petitioner is on the record admitting she expected to take half of Mr. Hart's fortune." Exhibit G is a time-stamped video taken from her own social media account where she celebrates the win while holding what appears to be the Hart family estate deed in her hands. We submit this to show intent and motive. She clicked to play. The courtroom filled with the sound of my ex's recorded voice, drunk on triumph. She said, "Count your days, sweetheart. By Christmas, I'm in Tuscany with your money." The judge's eyes were sharp now. Camera flashes popped like distant gunfire. I watched my ex's face change as strangers eyed the evidence she'd willingly given away. The look of having counted chickens before they hatched is a special kind of rage. She started to talk fast, her lawyer whispering into her ear, her fingers tightening. "Why would you post that?" the judge asked. "I thought it would be victory," she lied. "I meant it as a celebration." "Celebration doesn't explain the texts," Margaret said. "And celebration doesn't rebut the legal reality that the assets in question were conveyed to an irrevocable trust prior to the marriage. The court will not be a stage for a spectacle." Then the judge did something unexpected. She imposed sanctions. Due to the petitioner's public misrepresentations and improper attempts to marshal public pressure in a pending matter, she said, "This court finds conduct that warrants monetary sanctions and admonition. Furthermore, absent proof of fraudulent conveyance within 30 days, the trust's assets will not be deemed part of the marital estate." My ex paled. Around us, reporters scribbled, and the social feeds lit up with new headlines. "Judge slams trophy wife." "Public humiliation for Instagram divorce star." "Assets in mother's name shield husband." She stood up and tried to speak, but the judge cut her off. "This court will not be placated with theatrics," she said. "Proceed through legal channels." She'd expected to walk out with something. Instead, she walked out into a press scrum where cameras asked, "How does it feel to lose?" And she stared like someone who hadn't yet learned to take responsibility for their own pride. But the story didn't end there. People on Reddit, because of course people on Reddit, started piecing together the posts, cross-referencing county records. The court documents were public record. Anyone could look them up. I had the screenshots if anyone didn't believe me. I watched as skeptics turned into witnesses. Some people thought I had tricked my mother into protecting the assets just to avoid this exact scenario. They called it manipulation. Others called it foresight. Was I wrong to move assets to protect them? I asked on an online forum once. Was I wrong to let her think she had a payday coming? The answers varied. Tell me what you think. Was I out of line? There were collateral consequences. My ex had a business partnership with a lifestyle influencer named Gia, who had backed a pop-up shop in Bellevue selling Freedom Tees. After the ruling, sponsors dropped her. Her follower count dropped by 42% in 1 week. She took to working weekends at a boutique in Bellevue, selling clothes she'd once bought without thinking. 6 months later, I ran into her on a rainy afternoon near Pike Place. She was practical now, hair pulled back, not the polished socialite. We didn't speak for long. "You win," she said, voice flat, "but you didn't win the way you fought." "Maybe not," I said, "but I got what I needed." "People will say you're ruthless," she said. "People say a lot of things," I replied. "What do you think justice looks like?" She looked away. "I thought justice was taking half," she admitted. "I was wrong. I've had friends tell me I was cruel. Some say I weaponized the legal system. Others say I was protecting. What my mother and I had tried to preserve for decades. The truth is messy. I'm not proud of every decision I made. I didn't always act with perfect integrity. I let myself be driven by hurt until it was something else. Strategy, cold and precise. But here's a universal lesson. Vanity makes people make mistakes. When the world is watching, people tend to perform. And when someone performs against you, the best defense isn't always anger. Sometimes it's evidence, patience, and a trustworthy lawyer. If you're sitting there wondering whether you would have done the same, would you have let her gloat? Would you have revealed the trust? Would you have humiliated someone who'd once been close to you? I started a new routine after the ordeal. I logged my accounts differently. I spoke to my mother more. I dated, awkwardly, and eventually met someone who didn't count my money and who laughed at my worst jokes. Her name is Sarah. Yes, a lawyer, the kind that actually asked for receipts at dinner. She once said, "A man who can orchestrate something that sophisticated is never really broke." I laughed and told her about the ring footage. She laughed too, but then kissed me and said, "You deserve someone who doesn't see you as a ledger." People argue about whether social media caused the fall. I think it amplified it. My ex weaponized social media and then paid the price when it made her evidence. What would you have done with the messages? Burned the phone? Bought silence? Tell me, what would you have done? The legal facts are simple. $847 million is a headline. 47 deleted messages are a confession when recovered. 2 years of lies are enough to sour a marriage. The rest is human drama. I don't want to pretend this was a moral crusade. There were moments, 6 of them at least, where I thought the plan would fail. The hearing for temporary access. Daniel's potential betrayal. The cloud wipe. A last-minute leak to a tabloid. A skewed judge. My own mother's sudden illness the week before trial. Each time, it was like being on the edge of a cliff, but we climbed back. I have the screenshots if you don't believe me. The court documents are public record. You can look them up. The security footage doesn't lie. So now I ask you directly, have you ever trusted someone so completely that their betrayal felt like a physical blow? Would you let them humiliate you to prove a point, or would you cut off contact and walk away? Some people think I